And good evening from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm James Brierton. We have our Carolina Weather Group panel on standby tonight. It is August the 2nd, 2020, Sunday evening. Another 24 to 30 hours or so before we could be seeing a landfall of a tropical system here in the Carolinas. We have in Charleston Evan Fisher, Shay Gibson, and Jared Smith. Also joining us tonight, we have Scotty Powell and Frank Strait. Let's get straight on over to Frank, who's going to bring us up to date with the latest information. Frank, at this hour, here at about 10:36, we have the 8 o'clock advisory, but we're awaiting that 11 o'clock advisory just a few minutes away.
No, that's right. That next advisory will be coming out shortly from the National Hurricane Center, and we should see that advisory come out before too much longer. We'll take a look now at a satellite picture to show you what's happening right now. And Isaias looks a lot better than it did earlier today and last night. The shear appears to be relaxing a little bit, allowing it to become more symmetrical. The outflow's looking a lot better to the west now, so we'll keep an eye out for some intensification that might play a role in our upcoming advisory. Looking at the 8 p.m. advisory, though, we had Isaias still producing 70 mile per hour winds, maximum sustained winds, and the forecast was for it to remain nearly a steady state here through the next 24 hours or so and into Tuesday as it approaches landfall. We have tropical storm warnings in effect from Sebastian Inlet northward all the way up to Ocracoke Inlet, and a hurricane watch as well in effect for South Santee River in South Carolina up to Surf City, North Carolina, because there is some chance that Isaias does get a little stronger before making landfall. If it gets any stronger at all, it would become a hurricane. Also, tropical storm watches are in effect. That's the yellow area all the way up to Long Island and Long Island Sound. So this is what we'll be keeping an eye on, and we'll see if there's any changes coming up at 11 p.m. Back to you, James.
Frank, thank you very much. And yeah, we're waiting that 11 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center. This will be a full-on update where we get not only an updated position on the storm, but also a potential change to the forecast cone or intensity if one were to come. You can see the countdown clock there in the left-hand side of your screen. Sometimes they do come out a few minutes early. Jared Smith is in Charleston, South Carolina. He's keeping a close eye on the storm surge threat with this storm because, Jared, you know, we are talking about a tropical storm, but we don't want people to lose track of the flood threat that could come with this still.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, the big story with any of these, with the tropical storm, minimal hurricane, it's the water. I mean, it's actually very rare for the wind to be a widespread issue in most of these tropical systems, unless you're talking Cat 2, 3, 4, 5, obviously. It's the water that's the problem. And this is going to be no different on that front. Let me pull. So what we're going to do, I'm going to pull up my screen here. We're going to take a look at. The expected. We're going to take a look at the expected tides in Charleston Harbor, and this is certainly a interesting situation coming up. So one thing to note is that the tides are already overperforming. Weather Service had 7.1, 7.2 feet earlier tonight. And it went 7.49 feet. So I was right knocking on the door of the moderate flood threshold here. But all right, here we go. So there you go. So there's your peak from earlier tonight, and then we're gonna get to about 6.6 feet tomorrow morning. We're gonna start seeing some of those onshore winds start to kick up a little bit more. Start seeing some rain bands come in, and at 6.6 feet, if you get a sustained downpour in downtown Charleston, that's it. I mean, you're going to get some roads closed. I mean, that's going to be just the name of the game. And then what we're looking at is just around 9 o'clock, the expected impacts of storm surge begin. Potentially anywhere from 2 to 4 feet. I think 4 feet is probably a little on the high end of that. But, you know, if we suddenly see a more westward track that brings a center in south of Charleston, that is certainly within the realm of possibility. Right now, the Weather Service forecast is for 8 feet right around 9 p.m. That is major flooding. That's going to close a lot of roads. That's going to cut off some passages. And then we're going to talk about rainfall on top of that. And you know, models have been, you know, somewhat consistent in having some very heavy rainfall in the area right around the same time. Forecast position from the Hurricane Center, at least as of 5 o'clock, had the center just to the south of Charleston, which means that onshore flow pretty much is going to be maximized right around that time. So this is something that we certainly need to watch. Let me grab another graphic here, and obviously, for those of you watching now, you'll be able to see this. For our podcasters, we'll speak it out to you. And let me go first to the storm surge watches and warnings here. As soon as Zoom decides to populate my screens that I can share, which apparently I have a lot of. But we have storm surge watches up and down the Charleston coast right now. Charleston area is under a storm surge watch, basically starting from about Edisto River all the way up into southeast North Carolina. We have that storm surge warning, actually. So check that storm surge warning now. And again, this is the area where 2 to 4 feet is going to be possible. So places like Charleston, Georgetown, Myrtle Beach, those areas are going to be looking at the potential for some pretty significant storm surge. And then we have a storm surge watch that's up just south of Wilmington, all the way up into Pamlico Sound, into the Outer Banks. And so again, this is certainly, we'll need to see how the track evolves. We'll need to see how the intensity of this storm evolves, but ultimately the surge potential and the potential for significant flooding in places like downtown Charleston are the most critical things to watch. And James, I think we are starting to see the 11 o'clock roll in right now.
Okay, we'll give a second for that to populate, and then give Frank a moment to digest it all, and we'll go back over to Frank as soon as we've got that ready for you. We don't have any evacuations at this time in South Carolina, but in North Carolina, Ocracoke Island, 3,000 people have evacuated there. Ferries will stop running at 8:30 Monday morning because of the storm threat and the flooding there in that portion of North Carolina, where they have issued a state of emergency, not only along the coast, but a little bit further inland along the I-95 corridor. Let's bring in Evan Fisher, who's keeping a close eye on the flooding chances that we could see a little bit further inland along rivers, creeks, streams, and Evan, even from what's falling from the sky.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really targeting and looking at this area from Charleston up through the I-95 corridor, even all the way up towards Raleigh. If you look at the WPC Outlook, the excessive rainfall outlook for tomorrow, they've extended a moderate risk from Charleston all the way up to the North Carolina-Virginia border. And that is a risk level 3 out of 4, high risk being obviously 4 out of 4. We are looking at moderate tomorrow, but this isn't just going to be an I-95 problem. From a kind of a big picture standpoint, we're still going to see a slight risk extended across almost the entire eastern portion of the Carolinas, and even as far west as the Blue Ridge Escarpment, reaching into the Blue Ridge Mountains near and just to the east of Buncombe County, McDowell County, and up towards Boone. So this rainfall threat is nothing to be laughed at, and it won't just be Mondays. We're going to start seeing that rainfall ramp up probably tomorrow midday across portions of coastal South Carolina, and that will slowly spread north throughout the day Monday and really into Monday night for portions of like Wilmington and portions of North Carolina. But that rainfall will still be a threat on Tuesday. You can see the Tuesday WPC excessive rainfall outlook has that moderate risk still in effect for portions of Raleigh up to the North Carolina-Virginia border. At this point, the storm will have moved off to the north and east. So by midday Tuesday, we'll start to see that rain really winding down for many people, and then it'll eventually exit to the north and into Virginia by Tuesday evening. But, James, we are looking at some pretty substantial precipitation totals, a little bit concerning. It's up more from what it looked like 24 hours ago when we did our last update. Last night, we were thinking widespread 2 to 4 inches, perhaps, from Charleston up through that moderate risk area up towards Raleigh, but now we could be even looking at 4 to 6 inches of rain. The WPC is highlighting this area just to the south and west of Charleston, and potentially right over the Charleston metro as the bullseye, with up to 6 to 7 inches of rain possible. As Jared had just said a minute ago, 6 to 7 inches of rain on top of a high tide or even a moderate tide in Charleston does a lot of urban street flooding and creates it. So we're going to see flash flood warnings likely getting issued at some point tomorrow. So be paying close attention to your phone, wherever you get your, whether radio, wherever you get your warnings from. But this, once again, the corridor of strongest or highest rainfall totals, I should say, will be that I-95 stretch. And I wouldn't be shocked to see some higher rainfall totals than what's being forecasted here further east out towards the Outer Banks. The WPC is only highlighting 1 to 3 inches near Morehead City and out towards the Outer Banks. But if this storm takes a little bit more of an easterly track, we could easily see those totals creep up towards 2 to 4 inches. That's what we're looking at from the rainfall perspective, James.
Evan, thanks very much. We're giving viewers a look right now at current conditions across the area, thanks to our camera network, powered largely by our friends at WeatherStem. We'll get a glance at what the storm is currently doing from some of their cameras along the coast of Florida coming up in just a few minutes. Evan mentioned the threat further inland. We'll get to Scotty Powell in the foothills of North Carolina in just a second. Let's stay in Charleston, where we bring in Shay Gibson. He is our expert on all things wind and coastal. So, Shay, what is it that this tropical storm has raised your alarms and has caught your eye?
Well, I would say, and I'll go ahead and share a screen myself. I would say one thing that's concerning right now is that it's starting to get convection wrapped around the northern and western side now, where it was drier before. Looks like the upper shear is leaning back from the southwest versus the west, and the storm's going to be heading north, so it may have a chance to fire convection all the way around. So here you can see the eye or a wall trying to develop around an eye. We may see this develop a little bit better tonight. It is over the Gulf Stream, so it does have plenty of fuel at the surface. We just hope that the upper shear keeps the limiting factors in place. Taking a look at Datascope, and here's some of the convection I was talking about here. Some of the buoys are catching tropical storm force winds. We see Canaveral East buoy gusting up to 63 miles per hour. We also have Canaveral buoy here. That's the averages are hanging right around the upper 30s, near 40. And then gusting up into the 50s. Along the coast of Florida, we're seeing a lot of 30s and some 40s gusts from time to time. So some of our stations in our really dense mesonet for Florida are picking up some good readings from this. We just haven't seen that expansion of wind really get away from the core of it. I think most of the winds are residing about 115 miles out to the north and to the east of the storm right now. But now as we see convection starting to wrap around, we may see that wind field expand into the coast a little bit more. Now, we'll be heading north, so Florida's effects will start to diminish as it goes a little bit more over the ocean in time. We go up the coast into Georgia. We see winds are already up to 17 miles an hour, gusting to 20. They're pretty consistent in the upper teens. This will continue to increase overnight and into tomorrow morning, where those winds are expected to be near tropical storm force, at least for the AM, if not maybe a little bit higher in gusts, right? So we're looking at maybe 40. Because the storm's going to be pretty far away from the Georgia coast. We don't expect too many large effects along the western side, but as it nears the Charleston area, we see these winds pick up. Right now, very far away from the storm, we're seeing about anywhere from 13 to 15 miles an hour, gusting to the upper teens pretty consistently. We have one little surge today from an outflow boundary that popped in right between we're near 4 o'clock. We had a gust up into the low 20s. So, just a little warning shot from from the tropical storm all the way up to Charleston. For once today, at least. And that's what we're going to be expecting. And if we look at the PowerPoint from Charleston, for the National Weather Service Charleston area, we have potential for winds in our vicinity for portions of the Charleston area up through Berkeley County and coastal areas, potential for 58 to 73 miles an hour. We do have potential for wind 39 to 57 further down south, all the way past Savannah, all the way down to Altamaha Sound, where the Weather Service office ends. But these winds look like they could push inland all the way past Walterboro, maybe even halfway to Columbia. So could be seeing some of those gusts as those rain bands wrap into the coastline. Any westward jog of the system by even 30 to 40 miles can make these areas more prone to the higher wind speeds. So, once again, we're watching to see if the storm is going to continue to look more impressive and actually get the upgrade to hurricane at some point. That is possible. And they did mention that in their 8 p.m. Update, that there is a possibility we could see it. So if the storm grows and expands, then we will see more of that. Now, as far as eastern North Carolina, one concern that I would say is the winds will be increasing up there as well by tomorrow night. But it's over the Gulf Stream. If it develops a long feeder band up and down that Gulf Stream, then that can make conditions a lot worse for eastern North Carolina. So we'll be watching for that as well. That's just a possibility at this point. We've seen it so many times before when you have a storm heading into northeastern South Carolina or just around Wilmington, and it picks up a lot of moisture and really forces it up the coast. So that's it for me, James, for right now.
Thank you very much, Shay. Shay mentioned some alternative scenarios, and there's a little time left to see if any of those still have room to play. But we do have some the breaking update now, the 11 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center in a few minutes early. So let's bring back in Frank, who's had a chance to digest that and look it over. And Frank, what are we looking at here at the 11 o'clock update?
Well, there aren't many any changes at this point, James? I'll hopefully the screen sharing will work a little bit better here than it did a minute ago, and hopefully everyone's seeing the current forecast graphic from the 11 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center.
Not yet, but give it one more swift kick as we get that new data in. I can
I'll
see it
punch
populating
it in the nose
now.
a couple of
there
times.
it goes.
There we go. All right. As you can see, the advisory intensity remains the same as before. Maximum sustained winds are 70 miles per hour. The movements to the north-northwest at about 9 miles per hour, and no changes in the intensity forecast either. The only thing that really has changed here is that the tropical storm warnings have been extended northward all the way to Fenwick Island, Delaware, and that also includes the Sounds and eastern North Carolina. Tropical storm warning also out for Chesapeake Bay and Smith Point southward, and that goes all the way down into Florida still. So okay with the idea of just keeping this thing steady state. The shear is going to remain a concern. Really, the only thing that's been holding it back to this point is the shear, which does seem to be relaxing a little bit. As I said a few minutes ago, the outflow looks a little bit better, and the storm looks a little bit more symmetric now on satellite, and that appears to be the case on weather radar as well. Looking at the Melbourne, Florida radar, the surface center is a little farther south than where it looks like the rotation is here, because it is still sheared, but it does appear to be wrapping a little bit better now, at least the mid-level center. If it can pull that low-level center in, then we would have the potential to see some more intensification. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye on as one possible alternate scenario. And again, with the hurricane watches out still for the area between South Santee River and Surf City, North Carolina, again, if this gets any stronger, then the potential would be there. Well, it would become a hurricane any stronger at all. So we will have to watch out for this thing potentially becoming a hurricane as it heads northward. And again, the only thing holding it back is the wind shear. The waters are plenty warm enough to support much more intensity than what we're seeing right now. And there's and the storm's mostly over land or over water rather as well. So there's no significant land interaction to worry about as well. The other thing we'll have to watch out for, you notice that it looks like the center is, at least the mid-level center is displaced a little bit to the east. You saw that on the radar picture. That'll be one thing we have to watch out for as well. If that mid-level center ends up becoming dominant and pulling the low-level center in, that could result in a slight eastward shift in the forecast track, and perhaps it would end up going maybe instead of landfall point being close to Myrtle Beach, maybe it would be closer to Oak Island or Ocean Isle Beach or perhaps even Wilmington if there was an eastward shift. So that we'll have to keep an eye on as well, and all of that would have some minor implications as well to other things going on, like, for example, the rain going on over western North Carolina. That could shift eastward slightly as well, perhaps into the foothills, and the potential for heavy rain out there with the stationary front that has to wait on Isaias to get out of the way before it can shift on eastward and out of those folks here as well. And that's it for that, James. Back to you again.
Thank you. Frank, hang on the line there for a second because I have a question for you, and what I want to ask about is a little bit about the categorization between tropical storm and hurricane, and I want to preface it for our audience. Don't get too worried about the categorization, because if you think about Hurricane Sandy, that wasn't even a hurricane by definition, so these definitions are really just a scientist's playground for categorization. But with that in mind, Frank, for the benefit of our audience, how many more miles an hour does it need to become a hurricane again?
Well, the hurricane threshold 74 miles per hour, and the Hurricane Center, their advisories, they go in multiples of 5 miles per hour. So if it were to get any stronger at all, basically, it would be a hurricane. So we're basically on the threshold now. We're only slightly below it, and any intensification would result in becoming a hurricane.
Yeah, and even if we don't get there, the other side of that coin is just that we're 1 or 2 or 4 miles away, and that's not anything anyone's going to be able to discern by sticking their finger outside. So consider it a strong tropical storm or a Category 1 hurricane. And but for the record books, we'll keep a close eye on that because, as Frank mentioned, it's still over the water, so it has a chance that it could kind of accomplish that. Frank, the other question for you, especially if this takes a little bit more westerly of a track inside that forecast cone, is we need to be thinking about tornadoes as well.
Absolutely. That's going to be a concern for any areas along and east of the center track is the potential for some isolated tornadoes. It's something that happens fairly commonly. Thankfully, there's not a whole lot of area that's going to end up being east of the track, and hopefully the slight eastward shift does happen. That would minimize that even further, but that is something we'll have to watch out for, and something to keep in mind as you're dealing with Isaias over the next couple of days, especially during the worst of the storm, is to keep your weather radio or your television set or radio tuned to a station that gives you those instant updates and quick updates in the event that tornado warnings issued for your area.
Yeah, especially since, folks, we're talking about a landfall here some point late tomorrow night, Monday night, into early Tuesday morning. So you could very well be asleep, and you're going to need something to wake you up, and that weather radio is one of the greatest components we have. If you're joining us tonight and you're not living along the coast of the Carolinas or the I-95 corridor, if you're further inland like me here in Charlotte, or even into upstate South Carolina, western North Carolina foothills and mountains, we've got some weather we need to watch for you too. Let's bring in Scotty Powell. He's in Morganton, North Carolina. Scotty, what are you watching here in the next 24 to 48 hours?
Yeah, thank you, James. Definitely not the worst case that we're going to see down at the coastline, but we're going to have some rain indirectly effects from Isaias, as well as a cold front moving in that Frank alluded to just a little bit ago that's located out over Tennessee. Let me go ahead and share the screen here, kind of give you an idea of what I'm going to be watching for. And this is going to be if I can find it here on all my screens, this is going to be, well, I can't find it, but it's going to be the HRR run that's kind of showing some easterly flow, southeasterly flow that's going to be moving in off of the coast of South Carolina, North Carolina, and it's going to interact with this cold front. And we see this a lot here in the Western Carolinas, what we call upslope flow. And in fact, Evan produced an image there just a little bit ago that you saw much of Western North Carolina under a flash flood watch, as well as a slight risk for excessive rainfall. And we could see anywhere between 1 to 3 inches of rain, possibly some locations in those favorable areas, upslope areas, of seeing 4 inches of rain. It's been a pretty wet spring and summertime, so it's not going to take a lot of rain to produce some flash flooding, even well off of the coast here in the foothills of North Carolina and the mountains of North Carolina. In fact, these storms are going to be slow moving, and they're going to train over the same areas. And when they do that, those areas are going to see these tropical downpours, and that's going to produce the isolated flooding. We won't see widespread flooding, I don't believe, but I do believe that there would be some pockets that we see some flash flooding. In fact, over the last couple of afternoon thunderstorms, we've seen pockets of flash flood warnings issued. So that's what Western North Carolina is going to be facing. Not directly affected by the tropical storm, but it's aiding in the fact that we're going to see some heavy rain even this far inland off of the coast here in Western North Carolina, as well as that cold front that moves through the area on Monday night through Tuesday. So that's what we're watching here in the foothills. We also could see some breezy conditions, and as always with those breezy conditions and some heavy rainfall, we could see some sporadic power outages, trees come down, things like that. But it's not going to be as bad here in the western part of the state as it's going to be for our friends and followers out on the coastal areas of North and South Carolina. So, Jared, I know you guys facing a whole different scenario there in the Charleston area.
Yeah, to put it mildly, but I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, again, these track shifts are going to do some. I mean, it's the biggest conundrum in communicating these things. Tell people not to focus on the center because the storms are large and a lot of effects can be felt well away from the center. But also at the same time, the center of the storm is actually really critical to just how much of a magnitude of impacts you're going to have. And again, as Frank discussed earlier, it's a lot is going to be around structure. A lot is going to be, if it's a lopsided storm, a lot of that staying off into the ocean. If that shear kicks back up, then we have, then perhaps not as bad, at least for the Charleston area. Taking a look at the track again, and I've got it zoomed in pretty nicely on Google Earth here. Let me, I'm going to take over and real quick, and let's see here. So we got so there's your satellite image. And again, if this thing does pull a little more east, a stronger storm would do so. it's certainly possible that effects would be lessened in the Charleston area, but we still have to think about the surge impacts. Grand Strand, getting up into the Wilmington area. Still some. I mean, we need to watch those areas closely for the potential for storm surge as well and storm surge impacts. But you know, again, it's going to be interesting to see just how close the center gets to Charleston. I know in the last couple runners that we've had too, the coastal runners, we've seen these storms get pulled in a little prematurely. Most notably Matthew, which was not even expected to make landfall in the low country, actually came ashore near McClellanville. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be, it's going to be quite interesting to see, all of these little variables working together.
Jackson, watching on YouTube tonight, has a question about Florence, South Carolina. We'll come back to the USGS camera. And I thought Florence was a perfect example, guys, of some of the inland areas that could still be seeing some of these tropical storm force conditions, because Florence, South Carolina, tonight with a tropical storm warning ahead of the arrival of the storm. Again, another 24 to 30 hours from now. And the thing we want to also mention a lot when we talk about that Florence area is, especially if you're living along the river, you're going to need to watch for some of that the rising water, because we are going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 inches of rain falling from what is otherwise a relatively quick moving storm. But even after all that water falls, it's then going to flow down the watershed. So it's going to take time even after the storm moves out for all of that to clear up. So Jackson, I would say take appropriate tropical storm precautions tonight, and expect that tomorrow, by this time tomorrow, you're going to be dealing with a tropical storm.
James,
go ahead.
I wanted to add a little bit to that. Something we've not really covered is the motion of this storm. Normally, when we see tropical systems move in, they kind of slow down. This one's going to be pretty fast moving, so it's not going to have a lot of time to kind of cycle down. So I think we're going to see a wind threat well inland along that Interstate 95 corridor, including the Florence area there. I'm not going to say we're going to see, hurricane wind gusts, but we could see some 40, 50 mile per hour gusts that also could cause some trees down. So I think that tropical storm warning is well put up in that area just because of this storm's fast pace, the motion. It's not going to have a lot of time to cycle down. And I think we're going to see some more wind reports inland as we are along the coast.
Yeah, I agree with that, Scotty, and that's actually an important thing to consider. Looking back at the Hurricane Center's advisory graphic, notice they keep this thing a tropical storm not just all the way through North Carolina, but all the way up to New York City, all the way up through, all the way through New England for that matter. For two reasons. We expect it to move pretty quickly, so it won't have as much time to spin down as it's moving overland through the Carolinas. But also, as it interacts with the upper trough that's approaching from the west, that will help to maintain that intensity by keeping the outflow going, even all the way up through the northeastern part of the country. So these winds are going to be an issue all the way through its track along the East Coast.
Sharmar Davis on YouTube. What about the tornado threat with this storm? And we just answered back there in the chat as well too. But they were asking about that front right quadrant, and I think that's exactly right. If we were to see tornadoes with this system, you are most likely, although not exclusively, to see them in the front right quadrant, and all of that will be a factor of the motion as well too. So we'll keep a close eye on that, and I'm glad, Frank, that you mentioned the Mid-Atlantic, the New York tri-state area, even up into New England. We know we have folks watching on Peter's page tonight, Planet Weather there in New Jersey, so they're going to have to keep a close eye on that. We have the Storm Prediction Center Outlook up here. Frank, is that your screen? You want to walk us through the Sbc Outlook for Monday?
Yes, I just brought that up here, and for Monday, the SPC has a slate risk out for the PD region of South Carolina, parts of the Low Country, and into parts of eastern North Carolina as well, thanks to this tornado risk that will be spreading over the area as Isaias approaches. So that's, again, something we have to watch out for. Notice the surrounding marginal risk area. That does extend farther north, and there's a separate area covering that front becoming stationary over the western Carolinas as well. I don't think there's much of a tornado risk in that area, but some locally damaging winds would be a concern that far to the west.
Thanks, Frank. Earlier today, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper standing alongside other officials, including his Director of Emergency Management in the state, Mike Sprayberry, held a news conference to talk about preparations in their state. We've already mentioned the 3,000 evacuations from Ocracoke and the fact that eastern North Carolina and the Outer Banks under a state of emergency with federal assistance ahead of the storm. The officials talked about how FEMA is providing support both on location and remotely due to coronavirus, and I want to play you a little bit of the sound that those officials held earlier today as they're talking about dealing with a hurricane during the coronavirus crisis.
The COVID-19 pandemic remains a threat, and preparations may take longer and look a little different. We can stay safe from the storm and the virus if we're ready.
If told to evacuate by your local officials, evacuate as directed. Don't let concerns about COVID-19 prevent your prompt evacuation. Evacuate the shortest distance possible. Get out of the impacted area. Due to the pandemic, try to stay with family, friends, or at a hotel of your choice to minimize contact with others. If these options aren't available, go to a shelter. Remember, if told to evacuate, don't hesitate.
And they will be screening for coronavirus at public shelters if you do find yourself attending one of those, and they will be practicing social distancing and isolation for anyone who may be sick at this time. Last week, here in the Carolina Weather Group, we had former FEMA administrator. I don't know why I said the name of the storm right, but I couldn't get that out of my mouth. Former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate on the show. He oversaw the response to lots of storms during the President Obama administration, as well as his previous time with Governor Jeb Bush in the state of Florida. And he had some really straight words for what evacuations really mean.
Is if you choose not to evacuate in an evacuation zone, you risk drowning. I don't think we say that enough. I think we talk about evacuations as it's a precautionary measure instead of, folks, the reason we have all of this planning around evacuation zones for hurricanes is the consequence if you don't evacuate and the storm hits as forecasted, you could drown. That is an absolute risk. So we need to have people balance between the immediate risk of storm surge and what we're now seeing is aquatic risk in our communities of COVID. How to minimize the risk of COVID, but not encourage people or give more reasons to question to whether they're going to evacuate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that means that this year's storm preparations and your go bag should also include PPE, including a mask or cleaning supplies. Let's talk a little bit more about that storm surge threat before we wrap up for the evening, because I think this could be one of the big headlines, along with the winds, the power outages that we anticipate. The storm surge along the coast, Shay Gibson, is something that we are watching very closely with this storm that's going to be flirting with most of the coast.
Yes, James. Thanks. Make sure I'm not muted here because I'm sharing the screen.
Yeah, got you. Go ahead.
Good deal. Thank you. So yeah, storm surge. We talk about what develops storm surge, and you have to look at what the normal tide is going to be doing. We also have a full moon this weekend, right? So we have a full moon today, and going in through tomorrow, it's just going to be a full moon tide plus the normal tide, which is going to be higher than normal. It already overperformed tonight by 0.3 feet, what Jared shared with that earlier. And so what we have is, more or less, we have a higher than normal tide already, plus we have the storm surge itself at 2 to 4 feet. You're talking, we're talking 8 feet is what the Weather Service is saying right now, but we have to add that 2 to 4 feet to the normal tide that's going to be occurring at the time. Now, we also do have driving onshore winds in excess in the tropical storm force levels, pushing that water into the coast. And so someone asked today, why would there be a surge if it's going to go to our east? And the answer is the storm is actually pushing water out ahead of it as it's going from south to north. So we have a large body of water that's going to be coming to our area. It's already starting tonight. It'll be more tomorrow. Our low tide tomorrow looks like it's going to be over 2 feet, which that's very abnormal. So we're already seeing some effects of this surge already making it here. And it's just going to come up even more. Now, like Jared said earlier, the 4 feet might be a little bit on the higher end, but we do expect at least 2 feet. The Weather Service does have 3 feet listed, or greater than 3 feet, but we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. So right here, again, this graph showing 8 feet, which puts it into the major flooding. And if you add heavy rains in 4 to 6 inches or more for the Charleston area, we know that places like downtown can be heavily affected by this combination all at one time. And you're talking 4 to 6 inches or higher within a very small amount of time. So that coupled with the surge is what makes the flooding potential so particularly dangerous with this system here as it comes close, maybe a glancing blow or staying offshore and heading up to the north. But either way, we will see surge effects from it. And then the winds definitely won't help things either. Back to you, James.
Thanks, Shay. We'll be watching that very closely. So if you do live along the coast, be prepared to monitor the changing not only weather conditions, but also the flood conditions, the storm surge conditions as we go through, again, the next 24 to 36 hours. And if you live further inland, again, near along those waterways, we're going to be watching for some of those to swell too in a little bit of the longer term as the water will have to work its way on out. Here at the Carolina Weather Group, we will be back tomorrow night with more live coverage as we will be anticipating landfall of this storm. We also want to let you know right now that in addition to finding us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Periscope, we do have a podcast audio feed. Why is that important? Well, we like to stress that during times like this when we anticipate a high number of power outages, because you will be able to listen to our updates and also the updates from emergency management on that audio podcast feed with little to battery consumption or even little data consumption if you're on a weakened cellular network. So that's our promise to you that over the course of this event, if Governor Roy Cooper or Governor Henry McMaster hold a news conference, we will be able to turn that sound around for you and provide it on the Carolina Weather Group audio podcast feed that you can find at Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever it is you get your podcasts for your phone or your other devices. So Shay Gibson, I see as I pop your face back up here on the screen because we have a double box from Zoom looking at the 11 o'clock update here of the storm from the National Hurricane Center. Right now, officially not to become a hurricane again, but it is just going to be within a hair of possibly doing that. But one way or the other, whether it does it or not, folks, should we just say consider it a Cat 1 hurricane that is going to be coming, where we do have some hurricane watches along the coast as well? Any closing thoughts from our panel tonight here as we close up this Sunday night update, gentlemen?
Just to say that if you've been asked to evacuate, it's probably the thing to do. And if you live in a low-lying area right along the coast, particularly in the most flood-vulnerable areas like Charleston, which also has to deal with tidal effects too, may want to consider following those evacuation orders and getting to a safe place.
Yeah, as we close tonight, I'll hold up my my weather radio. They're portable ones. Make sure you've got some batteries in it. You don't want it to lose reception in the middle of the night if you happen to have a power outage. So this way you can be updated directly from the National Weather Service, whether they issue tornado warnings or flash flood warnings. You can get those right to you wherever you are, even if you are asleep. It'll beep and wake you up. So on behalf of everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. Thanks for joining us and trusting us to relay this important information to you. Stay safe, and we'll see you back here real soon for more coverage from the Carolina Weather Group.